Well, if you didn't bother counting, the entire spectrum of Jasons, Freddys, and Michaels only added up to 30. I know I'm cheating a little bit here, but I thought I'd close out LENNSKI's 31 Days of Terror with something fun, and God knows after 10 Halloween films we could use it. So saddle on up, let's get the show started. We're doing the Evil Dead Trilogy. In 1993, I was taken to see a bizarre horror comedy called Army of Darkness. I always respected the film because it was one of the first movies I saw that blended horror with comedy.
I got news for you, pal. You ain't leading but two things right now. Jack and shit. And Jack left town.
It's stupid, yes, but as a 10-year-old kid it had everything. Skeletons, a guy who had a chainsaw for a hand, demons, and damsels in distress.
Give me some sugar, baby.
And it took place in one of my favorite movie settings, medieval times. But as the movie started, it felt like it was part of a series. You don't really need to see the first two to enjoy it, but it would have been nice. Today, you can find any movie you want just by clicking on imdb.com. But in 1992, it wasn't as easy to find a movie title, especially an independent film like The Evil Dead. And what made it harder was it isn't called Evil Dead 3. Even calling it by its original name, The Medieval Dead, would have been helpful. But a title like Army of Darkness isn't exactly a dead giveaway. Okay, so going back to the beginning, The Evil Dead was an independent horror film helmed by Spider-Man director Sam Raimi, who I might add hails from my home state of Michigan.
That's right. This sweet baby was made in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
The movie's about a bunch of college kids who go into the woods and shack up in a cabin. The main character is Ash, played by Bruce Campbell, who stumbles upon the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead. The book is written in an ancient language, but by playing back an old voice recording, he calls forth the Deadites, demons who possess the living and feast on their souls. One by one, Ash's friends succumb to the Deadites, and the only way to stop them is by destroying the book. It's a pretty straightforward concept, and as you can see, isn't the most original story ever. But the film is widely recognized for its visual style, namely its dynamic camera movements. It's also probably one of the gorier horror films. At times, it gets too gory, to the point where it's almost like watching a cartoon. There are instances of humor thrown in, but in this first film it's more incidental than slapstick.
We're gonna bury her.
You can't bury Shelley. She's a friend of ours.
Ah, she's dead.
I admit I never gravitated toward this movie the way a lot of the fans did. It's a really cool DVD to have in your collection, just because of the cover alone, but it definitely doesn't age well. It was shot on 16mm, which has a distinctive look when compared to a 35mm film, and when the demons start showing up, they make the most ear-piercing sounds. It's kind of annoying.
You're not gonna leave me here, are you? Are you, Ash?
Shut up, Linda!
Shut up!
But I have to say, it's demented and energetic, setting it apart from your average paint-by-the-number slasher. It's actually a lot of fun to watch with a group of people. In 1987, there was Evil Dead 2. Sam Raimi had more money this time, so the film is basically a bigger, better-looking version of the first film. A common misconception is that the sequel is actually a remake of the first film because it starts off with Ash coming to the cabin with his girlfriend Linda. I'm not sure what Raimi's intentions were, but I think he was just trying to sum up the first film in order to continue on with the story. What confuses people is that in Evil Dead 2, when they arrive at the cabin, they're alone and not with their group of friends. But after the first 20 minutes, it picks up where the first film left off. Ash gets temporarily possessed by the demons, but gets reprieved when the sun comes up. He has until dawn to rid off the demons before he turns back.
Dead by dawn!
Dead by dawn!
Dead by dawn! Dead by dawn!
In the meantime, there's a female character, Annie, whose father was the one who first discovered the Book of the Dead. Once she gets to the cabin, she finds the place covered in blood, and the only person she sees is Ash, so she right away assumes he's a murderer. Ash finally convinces Annie that he's simply an innocent bystander, and then they have to fight off Henrietta, who was formerly Annie's mother before she became possessed. The effects are cheesy, but the movie is so much more over the top than the original that they do the film justice. The effects in Henrietta, not to mention Ash's undead girlfriend, are the prime examples. They're so cheesy and yet so fun to watch. Ash is basically a one-show wonder. I think anyone would agree that the centerpiece of the film is when his hand gets possessed by the demons, and after going completely apeshit decides to lop it off at the wrist. But that doesn't stop Thing from being a complete smartass toward his former master. I love when Ash traps the hand underneath the book Farewell to Arms. The gore level is also vastly increased, but it's also funnier. It also gets pretty stupid, like this scene where every single inanimate object in the room starts laughing like they're on an acid trip. But because of this comic book blend of action, humor, and horror, it's definitely better than the original. At the end of Evil Dead 2, Annie reads from the book, which actually opens up a portal through time. This sends Ash back to 1300 AD, where he ends up becoming a slave to Lord Arthur. And this is where the third film begins. The Deadites have plagued the land, and after Ash proves himself to the primitive Screwheads, is given the task of retrieving the Necronomicon. In order to set the land straight, he has to recite 3 simple words.
Klaatu, Marata,
When it doesn't go exactly the way he planned, all hell breaks loose, and he unleashes a skeleton army of the damned, led by his evil twin.
I live again.
You kind of have to watch the movie to figure that one out. Again, this film has everything. Now, what I find kind of interesting about the whole trilogy is that the first film was more serious than funny. The second film was equally funny and scary, and this film is simply hilarious. It's a cult classic, and even those who point out its stupidity have a hard time not enjoying it. But it's got skeletons, sword fights, monsters, damsels in distress, Bruce Campbell.
All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up. See this? This is my boomstick!
What more can you ask for? It also borrows from Gulliver's Travels. The scene where Ash has to fight off a bunch of little ashes is probably one of my favorite scenes in the whole trilogy.
London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down.
My fair lady.
Now, Army of Darkness has 2 versions out on DVD, basically the original theatrical version and the bootleg edition, basically Sam Raimi's director's cut. The director's cut obviously has some more footage and a few alternate takes, but the biggest difference is the ending. In the original ending, Ash takes too many drops and as opposed to waking up in his own time, which is what happens in the theatrical cut, ends up waking up in an apocalyptic future. While I prefer the theatrical ending, it was this joke of a cliffhanger ending that spurred the debate of whether or not there would ever be an Evil Dead 4. I got an opportunity to see Bruce Campbell at a Q&A following his film My Name is Bruce. To put it bluntly, he replied by asking his own question. How many of us really wanted to see the 4th Indiana Jones movie? He ended by saying that it just wouldn't happen because he was getting older. And you know what? Sometimes stories just simply have to end. Now, the first 2 films eventually spawned a Broadway musical. I've never seen it, but if you're a musical kind of person, I definitely recommend getting the soundtrack. It tells the exact same story, but as a musical, and basically has the same kind of humor that the movies have.
Cabin in the woods, ooh. Cabin in the woods, yeah. We're 5 college students on our way to an old abandoned cabin in the woods. What the fuck was that? Your sister has turned into a zombie. What the fuck was that? Your girlfriend was a demon too.
If you're going to sit around with a group of friends, eat popcorn, tell ghost stories, roast marshmallows, and watch scary movies, you cannot go wrong with this trilogy. If you haven't seen them, go rent them, because you're missing out until you do.